Alfa Romeo 164, which debuted in 1987, could have done more than just save a company drowning in debt. It could have put Alfa back on equal footing with the Germans from Stuttgart and Munich. Advanced, modern, fast, and yet genuinely unlucky. The 164 is exactly the kind of Alfa that some call the last true one, while others see it as a serious failure. And both sides have a point. But the real question is something else. Why a car with so much potential ended up the way it did? Our story begins in 1978, when Fiat, Lancia, and Saab signed an agreement to cooperate. The goal was to create a universal platform that could serve as the basis for several business-class models, or E-segment cars. At first glance, the alliance between the Italians and the Swedes looked unusual. These were companies with different engineering traditions, different approaches to building cars, and different ideas of what a product should be. It was not obvious what could connect them. But the logic was simple: pragmatism. The 1970s were a turbulent period for the global automotive industry. The effects of the oil crisis were still being felt. Safety and environmental regulations were becoming stricter, especially in the United States. And the cost of developing new models was rising. Fiat, Lancia, and Saab all had successful cars, but none of them had a modern and competitive large model, especially with front-wheel drive. At the same time, all three had limited budgets, and in this situation, there was only one option: to combine their efforts and share costs and risks. But the first result of this cooperation showed that, in practice, it was not so simple. In 1980, the Saab Lancia 600 appeared on the Swedish market. In essence, it was a Lancia Delta with different badges, a classic case of badge engineering with no significant differences. Saab buyers expected high build quality, well-thought-out engineering, and reliability in a harsh climate. Instead, they got a car with the typical problems of Lancia at the time: mediocre build quality, a tendency to rust, and a sense that the car did not really belong to the brand. Swedish buyers did not accept the Lancia as a Saab. In the end, only about 6,000 cars were sold over 2 years, a result that speaks for itself. When work on the new platform began, from the very start, the idea was not to produce the same car under different brands, as had been the case with the Delta. The goal was different: to create a shared foundation on which each company could build its own car, matching the brand's identity in both design and character. At the same time, a certain level of standardization was built in. The cars were meant to be similar in overall layout and chassis design, but this was not supposed to be obvious from the outside. As a result, the Type 4 platform gave rise to the Fiat Chroma, Lancia Thema, and Saab 9000. The design of the Saab 9000, introduced in 1984, was developed by Giorgetto Giugiaro of Italdesign. The Fiat Chroma and Lancia Thema were also created with the involvement of Italdesign, and as originally intended, these cars did not look the same. Their shared roots are not immediately obvious, except perhaps in the overall angular styling and the characteristic shape of the door openings. At the same time, Alfa Romeo was not doing well. One crisis followed another, and the attempt to create a mass-market hatchback ended in a disaster, both in terms of image and financially. At the same time, the flagship model, the four-door sedan Alfa 6, was selling very poorly. Neither the rich equipment, nor the 2.5-liter V6, nor the 1983 facelift helped the car gain market success. Only a few thousand Alfa 6 were sold per year, and against its competitors, this rear-wheel drive sedan simply got lost. The company's financial situation did not allow it to develop a new model on its own, so the decision was made to use the work already done by Fiat and Lancia, the same Type 4 platform. At the same time, Alfa joined the project later than the others and did not have full influence over the base architecture. As a result, it had to accept a transverse engine layout and front-wheel drive, since making major changes to an already developed platform was not possible. Naturally, the design of the new car was not handled by Italdesign, but by the Pininfarina studio. The project was led by Enrico Fumia, and this is exactly why the Alfa looked noticeably different from the rest of the trio. Compared to Fiat, Lancia, and Saab, which were developed with the involvement of Italdesign, the Alfa Romeo had a different presence: a lower and more elongated silhouette, a clear separation of hood, cabin, and trunk. Visually, the car was closer to a classic sports sedan. Strict headlights, the signature Alfa Romeo grille in the center, and carefully shaped surfaces. All of this gave the car not only a strong identity, but also good aerodynamics. And most importantly, despite the foreign platform, visually, this was a true Alfa Romeo. Inside, the car also felt convincing. Compared to the relatively simple base versions of competitors like Opel Omega A, Ford Scorpio, or Peugeot 605, the Alfa offered more features and a distinctive interior layout. The center console alone, filled with buttons and a digital climate control system, stood out. Technically, the Alfa also kept up. The base version was equipped with a 2-liter, naturally aspirated twin-spark engine, producing 148 horsepower and accelerated from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in about 10 seconds. In addition, there was a 117 horsepower turbo diesel and a 3-liter V6, producing 192 horsepower. With this engine, acceleration to 100 kilometers per hour took about 8 seconds, and top speed exceeded 220 kilometers per hour. This engine would later become one of the model's strongest points. With these starting conditions, Alfa Romeo had every chance to compete not only with other models on the same platform, but also with other sedans in this class. Competing with Mercedes and BMW was, of course, not easy, but fighting for buyers of Ford or Opel was quite realistic, and not only in Europe, but also overseas, as Alfa Romeo had high expectations for exports of the 164. The problem was that by the time the car was ready to launch, the company had almost no margin left. By 1986, Alfa Romeo was effectively bankrupt, and the question was no longer just about a new model, but about who would own the brand going forward. Ford was initially considered the main buyer. The deal was valued at around $750 million. Negotiations were active and already close to the final stage. But at the last moment, Fiat stepped in with a comparable offer, but on different terms. And in the end, it was Fiat that became the new owner of Alfa Romeo on January 1st, 1987. The story caused a lot of attention at the time. The press discussed how the deal slipped away from the Americans at the last moment, and even the European Commission began to look into the details. But it quickly became clear that the deciding factor was the terms. Ford planned to pay in installments, while Fiat was ready to complete the deal immediately, and moreover, invest about $3.5 billion into the company. Against this background, the choice looked quite clear, and by the autumn of 1987, the new Alfa Romeo sedan was presented at the Frankfurt Motor Show. By that time, the Fiat Croma, Lancia Thema, and Saab 9000 had already been in production for several years, and while Saab stood somewhat apart within this trio, the situation with Fiat and Lancia was different. The Fiat Croma was smaller than the other models on the same platform, and by European standards, was closer to the D segment, where it competed with cars like the Opel Ascona and Ford Sierra. At the same time, the Croma offered a reasonable price, decent equipment, and a fairly spacious interior. The engine lineup was wide, ranging from economical naturally aspirated units to turbocharged versions, with the most powerful being a 2.5-liter V6 producing 160 horsepower. Unlike the Croma, the Lancia Thema was designed as a higher-class car, despite sharing the same wheelbase. It had a longer body, more equipment, and a higher-quality interior. The engine lineup was also broad, but started from 2-liter units, and the top version was the Thema 832. And here the main highlight was, of course, under the hood, a V8 engine borrowed from Ferrari. However, despite this engine, the Thema 832 remained a niche model, expensive, fast, and largely image-driven. Only about 4,000 of these cars were sold in total. As for the more mainstream versions of the Thema, even with good performance and equipment, it could not compete with Mercedes and BMW, simply because it did not match their level. The transition of Alfa Romeo into the hands of Fiat did not go unnoticed by either the press or car buyers, and it certainly did not add any points to the brand. If before, Alfa stood out against the more mass-market Fiat, not only in design but also in its heritage, Now it became just one of the brands within the Fiat group. The situation was made worse by the shared platform. The Fiat Croma and Lancia Thema, although selling reasonably well, had already gained a reputation as second-tier cars. Issues with build quality, reliability, and corrosion had followed them almost from the very beginning. And against this background, the Alfa Romeo 164, arriving several years later, entered the market already carrying this baggage. Thanks to Fiat's investment, the new Alfa really was a step forward. In terms of technology, build quality, and overall reliability, it was one of the most developed models the brand had produced at that time. But what looked like progress for Alfa itself did not translate into a decisive advantage in the market. It still did not match the level of Mercedes and BMW, neither in interior quality nor in the overall refinement of the car. From a mechanical point of view, there were no major issues, and with proper maintenance, the engines were reliable and did not cause serious trouble for owners. But the situation with electronics was much more complicated. For the late 1980s, the Alfa Romeo 164 was packed with electronic systems, and 3 onboard computers controlled almost everything, from engine operation to the instrument cluster and climate control. In versions with adaptive suspension, the electronics controlled that as well, but this is exactly where the main problems began. Failures, errors, and unstable operation quickly canceled out the advantages of these systems, and often turned ownership into a constant struggle with the car's own technology. As already mentioned, Alfa Romeo had high expectations for the North American market. In 1989, Fiat reached an agreement with Chrysler to create a joint dealer network called Ardona. However, the 164 did not debut in the United States until a year later, in 1990. By that time, Chrysler had already lost interest in the project, and Fiat was forced to promote Alfa Romeo through its own small and outdated dealer network. Under these conditions, it was difficult to talk about a proper market launch. As a result, on one of the key markets, Alfa Romeo remained almost unnoticed, and it had to compete not only with German brands, but also with Japanese manufacturers that were rapidly gaining strength. The outcome was predictable. Sales were weak. Only about 7,000 cars were sold in the United States. In the summer of 1998, production of the Alfa Romeo 164 came to an end. Over 10 years, around 275,000 cars were built. On the one hand, this was a decent result compared to some earlier Alfa Romeo models. But if you look at other models on the same platform, the picture looks different. The Fiat Croma and Saab 9000 each reached around 500,000 units, while the Lancia Thema exceeded 350,000 over the same period. At the same time, it would not be correct to call the Alfa Romeo 164 a failure. But calling it unlucky would be fair. It appeared at a very unfortunate moment, right after the brand came under Fiat control, when Alfa Romeo's reputation was already under pressure. The situation was made worse by declining trust after the failed attempt to enter the mass market with a hatchback, as well as the collaboration with Nissan, which also did not help the brand's image. The shared platform for the flagship model added to this, reinforcing the sense of lost uniqueness. Strong competition and reliability issues effectively became a sentence for what was, in essence, a good car. And if things had turned out differently, the Alfa Romeo 164 could well have become a cult model.